I'm a 29-year-old woman, and if there's one thing I've learned in my life, it's that being the peacemaker in the family isn't all it's cracked up to be. For as long as I can remember, I've been the one smoothing over arguments, solving problems, and making sure everything ran as smoothly as possible. At first, it felt like my role in the family was important. But over the years, it became clear that it wasn't about keeping peace. It was about me being the one to sacrifice while everyone else took advantage. I have two siblings, my older brother, 32, and my younger sister, 27. Let's just say they've perfected the art of manipulation. Whenever there was an argument or some kind of drama, they'd twist things around until somehow it was my fault. They could break something, forget a deadline, or even cause a scene at a family gathering, and I'd be the one cleaning up the mess. And of course, when they needed favors, rides, help with homework, or a quick loan, it was always me they called. My parents didn't make things any easier. They have always had a soft spot for my siblings. My brother was the golden child who could do no wrong, and my sister was the baby of the family who got away with everything. Meanwhile, I was the responsible middle child, the dependable one. If I ever brought up how unfair it all felt, my parents would brush it off. "Don't be so dramatic," they'd say, "or they're your siblings, you're supposed to help them." It didn't matter if I was overwhelmed or struggling. They always made it seem like my feelings weren't as important. The money situation was another thing. My family has this habit of borrowing money from me, and when I say borrowing, I mean taking it with zero intention of ever paying it back. At first, it was small things, covering a sibling's bill here, buying groceries for the family there, but over time, it spiraled. My brother would ask for help with his rent, my sister would need money for some emergency, and my parents would need help with repairs or medical bills. Somehow, I became their personal ATM. It wasn't just about the money, either. I've missed out on promotions and opportunities at work because of my family. They'd call me to babysit my niece and nephew at the last minute, or they'd need me to run errands for them because they were too busy. One time, I had to cancel an important presentation at work because my sister had an emotional crisis and needed me to stay with her. My boss wasn't happy, and I lost out on a promotion that year. My relationships weren't spared either. My last boyfriend broke up with me because he said I didn't know how to set boundaries. He wasn't wrong. My family would call me constantly, even when I was out with him, and I'd drop everything to help them. I didn't realize how bad it was until he told me he felt like he was dating my family instead of me. The breaking point came a year ago at my sister's wedding. I had paid for almost everything, her dress, the decorations, even part of the catering, because she and her fiancé were struggling financially. I didn't mind helping at first. It was her big day, and I wanted her to be happy. But then the wedding day came, and during the speeches, my name wasn't mentioned once. Not even a thank you. Instead, she went on about how her husband and parents were her rock and greatest support. I sat there, stunned, realizing I had spent thousands of dollars and countless hours on a wedding where I wasn't even acknowledged. That night, I started reflecting on everything. I had spent my entire life putting my family first, and for what? They didn't appreciate it. If anything, they expected it. I realized that I couldn't keep living like this. A friend suggested I try therapy, and that was the wake-up call I needed. My therapist pointed out that my family treated me this way because I had never stood up for myself. I had let them walk all over me because I thought it was my job to keep the peace. I decided things needed to change. Quietly, I started putting together a plan. I set financial limits, no more loans or handouts. I stopped answering every phone call and let them figure out their own problems. At first, they didn't notice. But then, the final straw came. My family decided to throw a surprise party for my brother, and of course they expected me to handle everything. They didn't even ask, they just assumed I would do it. When I refused, chaos erupted. There was yelling, guilt-tripping, and a lot of "you've changed" thrown my way. My parents said I was tearing the family apart. My siblings accused me of being selfish. For the first time, I stood my ground. I told them I wouldn't be footing the bill or organizing anything. The fallout was immediate. My family started icing me out, barely talking to me unless they needed something. It hurt, but a close friend reminded me why I was doing this. For the first time, I felt like I was regaining control of my life, and I wasn't going to stop now. Update 1. The fallout from refusing to organize my brother's surprise party was immediate and dramatic. Within hours of my refusal, my phone started blowing up. At first, it was just my mom, alternating between guilt-tripping and making vague threats about how I was tearing the family apart. Then my dad chimed in, insisting I was being unreasonable and selfish. My siblings quickly followed, each with their own spin. My brother accused me of ruining his celebration, and my sister claimed I was just jealous of how close the family was. I stood firm. I didn't argue, I didn't try to explain myself further. I simply said I wasn't doing it. After that, the calls stopped. At first, the silence felt like a relief, but it quickly became clear they weren't just leaving me alone, they were icing me out. Family group chats went dead, and even my dad, who usually called me daily for random updates, went silent. The only time I heard from anyone was when they needed something. It was like I had become invisible to them, unless I was useful. My friends, however, were a lifeline. I opened up to them about what was happening, and their responses surprised me. Nearly all of them had similar stories about toxic family dynamics, and they were quick to validate my decision. One friend even joked that it was like we'd all been cast in the same terrible sitcom. It helped to know I wasn't alone, and their support kept me grounded. With fewer family obligations, I found myself with more time and energy for my career. I'd been working on a big project for months, and for once, I didn't have to drop everything to deal with a last-minute family emergency. When my boss called me into her office to announce that I was being promoted to project manager, I almost cried. It was the kind of recognition I'd been craving for years, and it felt like proof that focusing on myself was the right decision. But of course, the peace didn't last long. A week after the silent treatment started, my sister called me out of the blue. Her tone was sugary sweet, and I could tell right away she wasn't calling to catch up. After a bit of small talk, she got to the point she needed money, Her car had broken down and she couldn't afford the repairs. She promised she'd pay me back as soon as possible, but I'd heard that line before. This time, I did things differently. I told her I could loan her the money, but only if she signed a simple repayment agreement. It wasn't anything formal, just a document stating how much she owed me and when she'd pay it back. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. She muttered something about needing to think about it and hung up. That was the last I heard from her about the car. Soon after, I started hearing from extended family. My aunt called to ask why I was acting out and if I was okay. My cousin sent me a long text about how family is everything and how I should let bygones be bygones. It didn't take long to figure out what was happening. My parents and siblings were spreading their version of events, painting me as the villain who had abandoned the family out of spite. At first, I was furious, but then I decided to channel that energy into something productive. I typed up a post for Reddit detailing everything that had happened over the years and how I was finally standing up for myself. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of strangers chimed in to tell me I was doing the right thing, sharing their own stories of setting boundaries with toxic families. Some of their advice was exactly what I needed to hear, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was on solid ground. I also started focusing on self-care, something I hadn't done in years. I signed up for a yoga class, started reading for fun again, and even tried my hand at painting. It was like rediscovering parts of myself that had been buried under years of family drama. Then came the first major test of my newfound boundaries, a family reunion. Normally, I'd be the one organizing everything and making sure it all went smoothly. This time, I simply didn't go. My absence was noticed immediately, and within hours, I was bombarded with texts and calls. My mom accused me of disrespecting the family, and my sister posted a cryptic message on Facebook about some people thinking they're too good for their own blood. A few days later, my parents called with an ultimatum: apologize and go back to being the glue of the family, or I'd risk being cut off entirely. I calmly told them I wasn't going to apologize and that I wasn't willing to go back to the way things were. The line went quiet for a moment before my dad said, "Well, I guess you've made your choice." That was the moment things shifted. My family started to realize I wasn't bluffing. They still weren't happy and the tension was thick, but for the first time, I felt like I was the one holding the power. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Update 2. After standing firm against my family in the first showdown, I knew I had to take the next steps to protect myself. I started with my finances. Over the years, I had been guilted into sharing accounts, covering bills, and signing up for subscriptions for the family. First, I canceled all automatic payments linked to their expenses. It was a mix of utility bills, streaming services, and random loans I had forgotten about. Each cancellation brought a flood of texts and calls, ranging from "Did you cancel this by mistake?" to outright anger when they realized it was intentional. Things escalated when my parents showed up at my door unannounced. I had just gotten back from work, and there they were. My dad was fuming, and my mom was holding back tears. They demanded to know why I was betraying the family. They framed my actions as an attack, saying I was turning my back on everything they had done for me. I kept my composure and told them calmly that I wasn't willing to continue being treated like a doormat. I explained that I was setting boundaries for my own well-being. My partner stepped in at that moment, standing next to me and backing me up. That caught them off guard. They weren't used to anyone else being involved in these conversations. My dad left in frustration, and my mom lingered, trying to guilt me into changing my mind before finally leaving. Within days, my siblings jumped into the drama. One of them started calling extended family, claiming I had abandoned everyone because I thought I was too good for them. Now I found out about this when my aunt called, saying she'd heard I had cut ties with the family. It became clear that they were spreading half-truths and outright lies to get others on their side. Then came the family meeting. My mom called and insisted it was time for everyone to talk things out like adults against my better judgment. I agreed to attend. The atmosphere was tense from the start. As soon as I walked in, they all pounced. My siblings accused me of being selfish and ungrateful, throwing out examples of times I had helped them in the past, twisting them to make it seem like I owed them. My parents joined in, bringing up sacrifices they had made for me when I was younger. I was prepared. I had brought receipts, literal ones. I laid out every instance where I had financially supported them, including dates, amounts, and unfulfilled promises to pay me back. Their reaction was a mix of shock and defensiveness. They tried to downplay the amounts, saying it was just family helping family, but it was clear the numbers didn't lie. Then came the gaslighting. They claimed I had misunderstood their intentions and exaggerated how much I had been taken advantage of. They even tried to say they didn't realize how much stress it had caused me, as if that excused everything. When the conversation turned into more personal attacks, I got up and walked out. I wasn't going to sit there and be disrespected any longer. The next day, I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer. I wanted to ensure that no one could financially exploit me again. I went through all my accounts and made sure my name wasn't tied to anything they could access. The lawyer also suggested steps to protect my assets in case anyone tried something drastic, like taking out loans in my name. It was an exhausting process, but it felt like I was finally taking control. I shared an update on Reddit, detailing everything that had happened. The responses were overwhelming. People applauded my decision to walk out of the meeting and offered practical advice on how to handle further fallout. Some even shared similar stories, which made me feel less alone. A few days later, one of my siblings reached out privately. They admitted I was right, that the family had leaned on me far too much over the years, but they refused to say it publicly, claiming it would cause too much drama. It felt like a small victory, even if it didn't change the larger situation. Meanwhile, my mom doubled down on her guilt tactics. She left long, emotional voicemails about how the family was falling apart and how much it was hurting her. It was hard to hear, but I knew responding would only encourage more manipulation. I started blocking toxic family members on social media and even on my phone. The peace that followed was worth it. Therapy became my lifeline during this time. I worked through the guilt and learned how to prioritize my own needs without feeling selfish. My therapist helped me see that setting boundaries wasn't just about keeping others out, it was about letting the right people in. As time went on, the cracks in my family's dynamic started to show. Without me to fall back on, they began to struggle. My siblings couldn't rely on me to bail them out of financial trouble, and my parents were left trying to mediate conflicts they had always dumped on me. It wasn't satisfying to watch, it was just sad. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living my own life, free from their control. But I knew this wasn't the end of the story. Update 3. The silence from my family didn't last long. Within a week, they started reaching out again, each with a new emergency that apparently only I could fix. My oldest sibling needed help covering their rent. Another asked for advice on dealing with a complicated tax issue. And my mom even tried the "we just need a small loan to help your father out" angle. I ignored every single message. I didn't block them this time, I just let the requests sit unanswered. Not hearing back from me must have driven them crazy, because the messages became more frantic. My sister sent a string of texts implying I'd regret turning my back on family, and my brother followed up with vague threats about how I was being unreasonable. I still didn't respond. Meanwhile, things at work took a turn for the better. With no family distractions hanging over my head, I had been pouring all my energy into a big project. When it succeeded beyond expectations, my boss recognized my efforts with a major promotion. The timing couldn't have been better. The validation that came with the role, and the pay raise, felt like proof that I was on the right path. But back to the drama. The sibling who had caused the most chaos in our family, let's call them Jamie, had always relied on me to clean up their messes. Without me around, Jamie's bad decisions started catching up to them. It began with an eviction notice after failing to pay rent on time for months. Then their car was repossessed because they hadn't kept up with the payments. Instead of owning up to their mistakes, Jamie told everyone I was the reason their life was falling apart, claiming I had abandoned them during their time of need. Extended family members began reaching out, offering unsolicited advice about fixing things with Jamie and not letting pride ruin the family. It was clear Jamie had been making calls, spinning the narrative in their favor. I responded politely to a few relatives, explaining that I wasn't cutting ties with anyone, I was simply refusing to be taken advantage of anymore. But for the most part, I kept my distance. Then something unexpected happened. Jamie posted a public apology on social media. It wasn't perfect. There was a lot of self-pity and vague statements about family misunderstandings, but they acknowledged some of the ways they'd taken advantage of me in the past. I wasn't sure what motivated the post, but I later found out Jamie's closest friends had started calling them out for their behavior, and they had no choice but to own up to some of it. My parents, however, were determined not to let this go. They showed up at my place again, uninvited, pleading for one last family discussion. They claimed they were willing to make compromises, but insisted I had to do my part to bring us all back together. I didn't even let them inside. I calmly told them that the discussion they wanted wasn't going to happen and closed the door. The next day, I received a text from my mom with a thinly veiled ultimatum. If I didn't come to a family dinner they were planning, I would officially be written off. I ignored it. The dinner happened without me, and I later saw photos on social media where they all looked miserable, trying to force smiles for the camera. Instead of dwelling on the drama, I focused on celebrating my wins with the people who truly supported me. My close friends organized a surprise dinner for me to celebrate my promotion, and my partner went all out with thoughtful gifts and words of encouragement. For the first time in years, I felt like I was surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. The updates I shared on Reddit during this time went viral, attracting thousands of comments from people who could relate to my story. Some readers shared their own experiences of cutting off toxic family members, while others offered advice on how to navigate the next steps. The overwhelming support from strangers around the world gave me even more strength to stick to my boundaries. As I settled into this new normal, something surprising happened. One of my siblings reached out with a heartfelt apology, not a public one like Jamie's, but a genuine, private conversation. They admitted to taking me for granted and expressed a desire to rebuild our relationship. I told them I was open to reconciliation, but only under the condition that they respect my boundaries moving forward. Even my parents began to soften their stance. Their messages went from accusatory to almost conciliatory, with my mom asking if we could start fresh. While I wasn't ready to trust them fully, it was clear they were beginning to realize they no longer had the leverage they once did. The power dynamics in my family had shifted. For years, they had controlled me with guilt and obligations, but now they were seeing that those tactics no longer worked. I wasn't the same person who would bend over backward to keep the peace. With that realization came personal happiness I hadn't felt in years. I spent more time with my partner, explored new hobbies, and even planned a vacation, something I hadn't done in ages because of family responsibilities. As I set my final boundaries, I made it clear to everyone that future interactions would only happen on my terms. There would be no more guilt tripping, no more financial favors, and no more crossing lines. It was my life, and for the first time I was living it for myself. Update 4. It started with an unexpected knock at my door one Saturday morning. When I opened it, there stood my youngest sibling, looking like they hadn't slept in days. They weren't carrying their usual air of confidence. Instead, they seemed nervous, shifting from one foot to the other. They hadn't announced their visit, which immediately put me on edge, but I let them in. The conversation was different this time. They weren't there to demand or guilt me into anything. Instead, they admitted to taking me for granted over the years. They explained how my decision to pull away had forced them to reflect on their own behavior. It was the first time I'd heard anything resembling accountability from a family member. They even opened up about their own struggles, financial stress, a failing relationship, and pressure from our parents to fix things with me. I laid out clear conditions for moving forward. I told them that any future relationship we had would be based on mutual respect. There would be no more borrowing money, no guilt tripping, and no manipulation. If they crossed those lines, I'd walk away for good. They nodded, agreeing to everything, and left shortly after. I wasn't sure if the change was genuine, but it felt like a small step in the right direction. A week later, a handwritten letter arrived from my parents. My mom's neat handwriting filled the pages, and the tone was markedly different from her usual guilt-laden messages. They apologized for the ways they had hurt me, admitting that they hadn't realized how much of a burden they had placed on me over the years. Still, parts of the letter felt insincere, like they were trying to say what they thought I wanted to hear rather than taking real accountability. I didn't respond immediately, unsure of how to proceed. Therapy helped me unpack the letter and everything else that had been happening. My therapist pointed out that my anger wasn't just about the recent events, it was the result of years of unresolved resentment. I realized that the family's treatment of me had become a cycle, and I had unknowingly played a part in enabling it. Breaking free from that pattern was painful, but it was necessary. In the middle of all this, a family mediator reached out. Apparently, one of my siblings had suggested bringing in a neutral third party to help us address the tension. At first, I was hesitant. I didn't want to be ambushed or manipulated into fixing things on their terms. But after some consideration, I agreed, on the condition that the mediator would keep everything structured and fair. The mediated meeting was tense from the start. I presented specific examples of how I had been mistreated, complete with dates, text messages, and receipts. Some family members were shocked. Others immediately got defensive. My parents and one sibling tried to rewrite history, claiming I had misunderstood their intentions. They minimized their actions, saying things like, "It wasn't that bad," or "We didn't know you felt this way." The mediator stepped in, keeping the discussion focused, but the gaslighting was relentless. When it became clear that certain members weren't ready to take responsibility, I decided to end the meeting early. I wasn't going to sit there and listen to excuses. Walking out felt like reclaiming my power all over again. That evening, I shared the experience on Reddit. The comments poured in, validating my decision to leave the meeting and reminding me that progress doesn't happen overnight. Some even shared similar stories about family dynamics, which helped me feel less isolated. Amidst all the tension, there were small wins. A cousin reached out to tell me how my story had inspired them to set boundaries in their own life. They had been dealing with their own toxic family dynamics and felt empowered to make changes after seeing my journey. Knowing that my actions were having a positive ripple effect made it all feel worthwhile. But the guilt trips from my parents didn't stop. They started sending pictures from family events I wasn't invited to, holiday dinners, birthdays, even a random barbecue. The captions were pointed, things like "missing someone special today" or "family isn't the same without all of us together." I ignored the messages, focusing instead on the support from my chosen family. My friends and partner continued to rally around me. They reminded me of how far I had come and helped me stay grounded during the tougher moments. With their encouragement, I stayed consistent in therapy and found new ways to prioritize my own well-being. Over time, one of my siblings began making a real effort to apologize. They acknowledged specific incidents, took responsibility for their actions, and didn't try to justify or minimize their behavior. It felt genuine, and for the first time, I started to believe that reconciliation was possible, at least with them. I reinforced my boundaries with everyone else. I made it clear that any future interactions would depend on respect and accountability. There would be no more bending the rules or making exceptions. Those days were over. Despite the setbacks, there were glimmers of hope. The sibling who had apologized began modeling better behavior, which seemed to influence the others. The family dynamic wasn't perfect, it probably never would be, but there were signs that things could change, even if only slowly. For now, I was focused on continuing to build a life that wasn't dictated by family drama. Whatever happened next, I knew I was ready to face it on my own terms. Update 5. The holiday season came and went without a single family-related meltdown. For the first time in years, I spent it entirely with my partner and close friends. We decorated the house, cooked an elaborate meal, and even had a small gift exchange. The absence of family drama felt almost surreal. There were no last-minute guilt trips, no frantic calls asking me to fix a crisis. It was just peace, and it reminded me of what I had been missing for so long. But as the new year approached, my parents made what they called their final attempt to reach out. This time, it was different. They sent a video message, something they had never done before. In it, my mom and dad both spoke directly to the camera, apologizing for how they had treated me over the years. They talked about reflecting on their actions and how they now understood the impact it had on me. They promised to do better and asked for a chance to rebuild the relationship. I didn't respond right away. The apology seemed sincere, but I wasn't ready to let my guard down completely. After discussing it with my therapist and my partner, I decided to reply, cautiously. I thanked them for the message but made it clear that any future relationship would have to be on my terms. I listed my conditions, no manipulation, no guilt trips, and a genuine effort to respect my boundaries. They agreed, at least for now. Meanwhile, the sibling who had started apologizing earlier kept up their efforts. They reached out regularly, but not in an overbearing way. Instead of trying to jump back into old patterns, they asked how they could make things right. They took responsibility for specific incidents and even started setting boundaries within their own life, inspired by what I had done. It felt like real progress, and slowly, I began to trust them again. Then came something I never expected, a public apology from my family. It happened during a gathering with extended relatives. My parents stood up and addressed everyone, acknowledging how they had treated me in the past. They explained that they had taken me for granted and wanted to make amends. Hearing about it later from my cousin was both shocking and validating. It was the first time they had taken ownership of their actions in front of others. I updated Reddit about the recent developments. The post quickly went viral, with people commenting on how rare it is for families to change. Some were skeptical, but others shared stories of reconciliation, giving me hope. The support was overwhelming, as it had been throughout this entire journey. It reminded me of how far I had come and how much stronger I had become. Therapy continued to be a crucial part of the process. One breakthrough session helped me fully let go of the resentment I had been holding onto for years. I realized that while their behavior had hurt me, I didn't need to carry that pain anymore. I was finally able to focus entirely on my own growth and happiness. With the family drama no longer dominating my life, I hit a new milestone in my career. A project I had spearheaded brought in major results for my company, and I was rewarded with another promotion. This one felt like a culmination of all the hard work I had been putting in since cutting ties with my family's demands. It was yet another reminder that I had made the right decision. To celebrate, my friends and partner organized a surprise party for me. They went all out, decorating the space with photos and mementos from my journey over the past year. It was touching to see how much they cared and how invested they were in my success. It truly felt like I had found my chosen family. Back on the family front, the changes were slow but noticeable. My parents and siblings started reaching out respectfully, asking for permission before involving me in anything. There were no more guilt-laden messages or frantic demands for help. Instead, the tone of our interactions became cordial and, dare I say, normal. I kept my distance emotionally, though. While I appreciated the effort, I wasn't ready to dive back into the deep end just yet. Even extended relatives, who had previously criticized me for abandoning the family, began to see my side. After witnessing my parents' public apology and hearing more about what had happened, they started reaching out with supportive messages. Some even thanked me for showing them it was okay to set boundaries in their own lives. As the dust settled, I made my final post on Reddit. I thanked the community for their advice, encouragement, and validation throughout this journey. I shared how setting boundaries had not only improved my relationship with my family but also allowed me to grow as a person. The comments were filled with positivity, with many readers saying the story had inspired them to take steps toward their own peace. Looking back, I couldn't believe how far I had come. The person I was a year ago wouldn't recognize the life I have now. Setting boundaries wasn't easy, and it came with a lot of pain and difficult moments, but it was worth it. I finally felt free. Moving forward, I'm focused on building a happy, balanced future, one defined by mutual respect, healthy relationships, and personal fulfillment. My life is no longer dictated by my family's demands, and for the first time, I feel truly at peace.